Star Wars Episode 7, A Corpse Through Which the Force Speaks, by Kyle Stiff. Prologue. Beneath the Star of Death. 4 years after the Battle of Yavin. As soon as Omicron Squadron left the cover of the woods, their gaze turned to the scarred face of the Death Star hanging over the endless forests of Endor. Sergeant Regis could feel the stormtroopers of 14th Century Moon Platoon turning to look at them. But rather than greet them, Sergeant Regis felt it was important to take a moment and look upon their symbol of hope, the Emperor's metaphorical hammer that was going to smash the rebels into dust. "I wonder if they have the showers working up there," said Sindo. "They have everything working," said Vasily, their support specialist and sniper. "It's the operations down here that they're behind schedule and S backwards." Birdie, their tall, broad-shouldered point man, laughed under his breath. "The Death Star is beautiful, but down here is where the fun's at." "Fun for you, Birdie," said Vasily. He swung his long San Blas F9E scoped rifle behind his back, then added, "Visibility in the woods is about as far as I can reach out with my hand. You think I like carrying around this paperweight?" "Let's pretend to be professional for a minute," said Sergeant Regis. "Here comes the commanding officer of this outfit. I can see him shaking from here, so let's go helmets off and put him at ease." The 8 members of Omicron Squadron removed their helmets. They were young for Special Forces, but Sergeant Regis was by far the oldest, being in his early 30s. He looked the part of a father figure with his thick beard and easy smile. Sindo glanced at him and returned his smile. Dimples formed in her tanned cheeks, looking unexpectedly charming despite her wavy red hair plastered to her head after their long, sweaty trek through the woods. Vasily, on the other hand, did not bother trying to charm anyone. He had a long, lean face, dark hair, and a seemingly permanent scowl, which was currently directed at the approaching officer. "Took you gentlemen long enough," said the Major, temporary commanding officer of 14th Century Moon Platoon. His voice sounded flat and tinny through his helmet speakers. Glancing at Birdie, he hesitated, then added, "But we're glad you're here nonetheless." Sergeant Regis's smile widened. Birdie, his point man, was a head taller than most men, and broad-shouldered enough to give a Wookiee pause for thought. His ice-blue eyes, chiseled features, platinum blonde swept-back hair, and absolute devotion to the Empire also made him something of an Imperial poster boy. Hearing the Major's quick change in tone, Birdie snorted and turned away. "Likewise, sir," said Sergeant Regis, turning to look over the stormtroopers gathered on the hillside. 2 Lambda-class T-4 shuttles sat within the clearing, an impressive landing job, as the clearing hardly made for ideal landing. Though the platoon CO outranked Regis, Omicron Squadron was technically in charge of the operation, so Regis knew the Major would have to be lenient with their conduct. "Comms have been choppy since we touched down. Any changes?" "Thankfully, no. The rebels have fallen into the trap. Shield Station says they're being dealt with as we speak." "And what about—" "Skies are clear," said the Major, gesturing overhead. "The Emperor has the rebel fleet in the bag. They're trapped between the Death Star and our own fleet." Sergeant Regis laughed, and Omicron Squadron sighed in relief. "Well, that's going to make our operation just a little bit redundant," he said. "Sounds like the boys at Shield Station already have things in order." "It'll be boring, but boring is good," the Major added, nodding. "With the rebels put down, we shall finally have peace." "Peace?" Birdie chimed in. "I dare say we'll be busy enough, sir, putting down aliens." The Major said nothing, but Regis clapped his point man on the shoulder. "True enough, son, true enough," he said. "What in the Emperor's name is that thing?" said Vasily. Regis turned and saw a strange sight. Above the trees lurched a giant creature, roughly humanoid in shape, with long black hair that concealed its facial features. Trees shook as the beast stumbled and fell against the heavy trunks. It struggled to right itself, its fanged mouth grimacing in pain as it did so. Though it was difficult to gauge what the creature was doing, Regis realized the beast had several ropes connected to its neck. The ropes trailed down behind tree cover and were pulled taut as something guided the beast. "That's a Gorax," said Sindo. "Native fauna of Endor." "Somebody's pulling it somewhere," said Regis. "We better check this out." Birdie suddenly whirled, and Regis turned as well. He was used to his point man's intuition for danger. They scanned the dark woods, as if fully expecting rebels to pop out at any moment.
"See something?" said Regis.
"There,"
said Birdie.
"Someone's watching us."
"I don't see anything," said Vasily. Regis focused on the dark, muddy features of trunks tangled in thick vines, his pulse beating in his ears. Sure enough, he saw pinpricks of light reflecting from yellow eyes. Short, furry creatures watched them from the woods. As soon as he noticed one, he saw 3, perhaps 4 others crouching nearby. An icy chill ran up his spine when he realized the creatures were crouching where his squadron had just exited the woods, meaning they had followed them here. "No sudden movements," said Sergeant Regis. "Birdie, send a warning shot their way." Birdie slowly raised his heavy T-21 repeating blaster.
"I could hit one between the eyes, sir."
Sergeant Regis considered, then said, "I suppose that'd overcome our language barrier." "Do it." Regis's radio squawked just as the Major pressed his helmet against his ear to hear a transmission of his own. Regis threw on his helmet and was overwhelmed by static. "Got the drop on us," said the transmission. "This, Shield Station Command. Repeat, rebels have turned on us and creatures in the woods attacking us. Repeat, we are under attack. The rebels—"
"Shield Station is under attack!"
Regis shouted.
"Those creatures are helping! Weapons ready! Fire! Fire! Fire!"
Regis was annoyed when the Major delayed giving a similar order, as he seemed intent on listening to the transmission while his platoon stood motionless on the hillside. Regis had no doubt the platoon's comtech was in his tent with his mouth hanging open, unsure how to proceed. Omicron's squadron, at least, did not disappoint, as Birdie immediately fired into the woods. Then the rest of the squad threw on their helmets and joined him. Vasily went down on one knee and leveled his sniper rifle in one smooth motion. As crimson blaster bolts tore through bushes, scattering the demonic critters, Vasily's sniper rifle roared and sent one of the aliens flying through the air end over end. Even over the wail of blasters and shrieking aliens, we just heard the distinct sound of what could have only been a catapult. Catching movement, he craned his head and saw a 4-legged bovine creature flying through the air. It was already dead, its stiff legs poking out at odd angles. Regis watched it arc over the camp, thinking that he was surely dreaming. Finally, the big cow-like projectile crashed into the middle of the camp, sending stormtroopers running for cover. Though the animal did not hit anyone, the sudden roaring of the Gorax told Regis that the catapulted cow was not a weapon. It was a lure. "Alien incoming!" Sindo shouted, and sure enough, Regis saw that the giant had been freed from its restraints and was tearing its way through the trees, desperate to get the remains of the cow before anyone else could eat it first. "Look at that thing!" Vasily shouted. "Sir, what do we do?" Regis reasoned that that was a good question, and he wished someone wiser and higher ranking than himself could chime in with a better plan than one he could come up with. Before he could respond, he heard someone screaming over the comm. "They're everywhere!" Just as he noticed that the woods was teeming with monsters. All around him, the stormtroopers were firing on short, furry natives that blended in with the foliage, almost seeming to disappear as they ran in and out of cover. Regis had seen a report on the Ewoks, and while he had been disgusted reading about the man-eating savages, he had also paid them little mind, as they seemed content to hide in their treehouses. The fact that the radio was currently overwhelmed by reports of a planet-side rebel uprising did not seem like a coincidence to him. Somehow the rebels had radicalized the flea-bitten savages and were using them to run interference. "Bring down that giant!" Sergeant Regis shouted. "If this platoon sees that monster, they'll panic!" "Understood, sir," said Birdie, signaling the squad to turn and fire. As Cindo lifted her rifle, Regis pushed it down. "Cindo, get us one of those shuttles." "Sir," she said, "I'm not cleared to requisition gear from this outfit." "You are now, Cindo. Do what you have to do. I have a bad feeling about this." Without further protest, Cindo took off. Regis turned in time to see the Gorax break into the clearing. The furry giant had a bare, wrinkled face, like some kind of goblin deity brought to life. Its mouth twisted in a rictus of hatred, nostrils dilating as it smelled the stench of its own fur catching fire under a hail of blaster fire. Though the Gorax's eyes fell on the bovine creature it had so foolishly chased, it could not ignore Omicron Squadron. So it was that the flaming monster charged toward the team, screaming in rage.
"Get out of the way!" Sergeant Regis shouted. He grabbed Vasily by his armpit and dived as the giant charged into them. They fell in a heap as two teammates disappeared under the monster's feet. The Gorax bent and picked up another squadmate, opening its hideous maw to reveal uneven rows of yellowed fangs. Only Birdie held his ground, racing between the Gorax's legs and firing directly at its crotch. The Gorax yelped and leaped, dropping the stormtrooper before running deeper into the camp. Birdie bent and checked on his teammate, but Regis could tell by the stormtrooper's twisted limbs that he was gone. The stormtroopers of 14th Century Moon Platoon, already pelted by rocks and crude arrows, saw the flaming Gorax racing toward them. Some turned and fired, leaving themselves vulnerable to still more projectiles, while others fled, seeking the cover of the woods. It was, of course, a trap, as the air filled with the shrill cry of malevolent Ewoks falling on the stormtroopers, bludgeoning them with crude axes made of bone and chipped stone, or even tearing off stormtrooper helmets and slashing faces with their filthy claws. Regis took stock of his team. He was down 3 men, but he knew things would get even worse if the platoon was not brought to order. "Forward!" he shouted. "Bring that monster down and secure the shuttles!" Birdie took point, leading them as they advanced and blasted the Gorax in its back. One of the 2 shuttles suddenly powered up, then rose. The Gorax's attention fixed on it as the wings lowered into flight position. "Is that you, Cindo?" said Regis. "Watch out for that!" It was too late. The Gorax ran and crashed into the shuttle, lashing out with blind, stupid rage. The shuttle wobbled under its weight, then the monster's claws tore through the cockpit, no doubt killing the pilot. "Cindo!" Regis shouted. "Damn it!" The shuttle turned to dead weight, crashing and pulling the Gorax off balance as its hand was hung up in the ruined cockpit. Just then, one of Vasily's heavy sniper rounds drilled the side of the monster's head. It staggered with blood pouring freely from its mouth. Finally, the Gorax fell on top of the shuttle, a flaming ruin, with limbs writhing senselessly despite being dead. "I've had enough of these monsters," said Birdie. "Let's kill 'em all!" "Right," said Regis. "Sweep the entire camp. Serpent formation. Birdie take point, and Vasily—" In response, Vasily cried out in pain and terror. Turning, we just saw a gang of savage Ewoks practically on top of them, swinging their clubs like miniature puntball players. Vasily lay on the ground, kicking like mad, only to have a striped brute grab his ankle and bite down with bestial ferocity. Vasily bellowed as white plastoid armor cracked and alien teeth tore into flesh. Regis raised his rifle, but an albino Ewok in a leather hood tackled him, driving the air out of him and knocking him over in a heap. As another Ewok wrapped tiny, muscular arms around his throat and fought to pull his helm off, Regis fixated on the voice of the platoon CO screaming in his comm. "Death Star shield is down! Repeat! Shield station has been destroyed!
Death Star security is compromised! Abandon this hill! Abandon!
No, hold this position, Regis shouted. If you go into the woods, these freaks will— The Ewok grappling his helmet twisted his head. Then another jumped on his chest, driving the air out of him once again. He watched in horror as two savages took turns beating one of his teammates on the helmet with their makeshift clubs. The stormtrooper sat in a crumpled heap, with blood pouring out from under his helmet. Yet still the brutes attacked him, their mouths hanging open and their unblinking eyes wide with bloodlust. There was an ear-splitting roar and blast of wind. Then the Ewoks jumped off of Regis. He fell limp. Unable to breathe, he pulled off his helmet and sucked in air. Turning, he saw the second Lambda T4 hovering just overhead.
"Got us a shuttle, Sergeant,"
said Sindo, her voice amplified by the craft's external speakers. Regis wanted to congratulate her on surviving, but considering their situation, he was not sure if the living were the lucky ones. He rolled over in time to see Birdie pick up an Ewok and toss him aside. As the Ewok hit the ground, Birdie lifted his heavy rifle and fired, putting a round through its furry chest. Birdie's white armor was covered in blood, but Regis doubted any of it was his own. Regis rolled over and found Vasily lying on his back with one hand thrown over his head. He was not moving. "You alive, Vasily?" said Regis. "No, I'm not," Vasily shouted. "Little bastard chewed my leg off." Birdie bent over him, then turned to Regis.
"Doesn't look good, Sergeant. Chewed down to the bone. We need to—"
"We're going," said Sergeant Regis, forcing himself up. Fearing Sindo's shuttle, the Ewoks were giving them a wide berth, but the rest of the encampment was completely overrun. A bottomless pit of frustration threatened to swallow Regis's heart as he watched his fellow stormtroopers, with superior arms and armor and tactical training, falling before a horde of woodland savages. The shrieking and senseless babble filled him with loathing. He was distracted by Vasily's cries of pain as Birdie helped him up. The shuttle's entry hatch lowered, then Sindo rotated the shuttle, expertly keeping it just off the ground. Regis leaped onto the entry hatch, then turned and covered Birdie as he hauled Vasily on board.
"What about the platoon, CO?"
said Birdie. "What about him?" Vasily shrieked. "He's already dead," said Regis. His voice steady as ice flowed through his veins. "Even if he's still alive, he's gone." With the hatch closing behind them, Sindo gained altitude and abandoned the field of battle. Sergeant Regis went to join her in the cockpit. Her helm was off, but she did not turn to look at him. Her face was bloodless and pale, her gaze fixed ahead. As they took to the sky, Regis could see the smoke rising in the distance, where the shield station had been destroyed by the rebels. No one spoke. The only sound was the hum of the engine and Vasily's occasional cries of pain. Over the endless forests of Endor, Sergeant Regis looked upon the lights flashing within the hollows of the Death Star. It suddenly exploded in a flash of light. There was a silent, white puff of mist. Then it was gone. Like smoke blown away by the wind, their hope had disappeared. Sergeant Regis knew the Emperor had been on board, and Lord Vader as well. They had been betrayed. Of that, he was certain. But it was not just a weapon that had been lost, nor even their leaders. Just like that, the Empire itself was gone, and every human in the galaxy had been betrayed to alien powers. Regis leaned back against his seat, deflated as his spirit seemed to leave him. He envied the men who had been beaten or clawed to death by the forest monsters. Even though he was still alive, he knew that he was already dead.